Black CEO kicked out of an executive airport lounge. 9 minutes later, she revokes the billionaire's VIP access. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. In the bustling terminal of a high-end airport, Vanessa Clark, the CEO of Summit Enterprises, walked into the exclusive executive lounge, dressed in simple, understated attire, dark jeans, a soft cashmere sweater, and black flats. She blended in effortlessly with the crowd. But as she approached the front desk to check in for a private meeting, the receptionist, Lisa, barely glanced at her. Without hesitation, Lisa coldly informed her, "This lounge is for real clients. You need to leave." Vanessa didn't react, but the words stung. After all, she knew the drill. This wasn't the first time she had been judged by her appearance. It wasn't the first time someone had mistaken her for someone who didn't belong. But what happened next would shake the entire lounge to its core. Stay with me, because in just 9 minutes, the woman they humiliated would rewrite the rules. Keep watching to find out how this Black CEO turned a humiliating moment into a powerful statement of justice. In the silence that followed Lisa's command, Vanessa simply stood still, her calm demeanor unshaken. Lisa, confused by Vanessa's lack of reaction, turned away, dismissing her without a second thought. What Vanessa knew, though, was that she wasn't just anyone. As the receptionist continued to speak to other guests, Vanessa pulled out her phone, dialing her assistant. "Activate Protocol 6, she said quietly, her voice a calm whisper amidst the rising tension. Within moments, her assistant confirmed, "It's done, ma'am." At that moment, the tension in the air was palpable, but it wasn't directed at Vanessa. Across the lounge, whispers began to swirl as a few patrons looked on curiously, sensing something wasn't quite right. As Vanessa moved to sit down, another employee, Edward, approached, his eyes scanning her attire with disdain. "You don't belong here," he sneered. "This isn't the place for someone like you." Vanessa's lips barely moved as she replied, "You should check my name." Her words were measured, controlled. Edward, undeterred, shook his head dismissively. "We need verification." With a simple flick of her wrist, Vanessa pulled up a document on her tablet and slid it across the table. Before Edward could react, the lounge manager, Lisa, came over with a sharp tone. "This isn't a walk-in center," she declared, eyes narrowing as she looked at Vanessa. "You're not a verified client." Vanessa's gaze met hers. "I don't need your verification," she replied coolly. "I own this bank." The room fell silent. The realization hit them all at once. The woman they'd just tried to eject wasn't just a random guest. She was the CEO. The twist was real, and the moment of reckoning had arrived. The tension in the room was electric. As Lisa and Edward exchanged uneasy glances, Vanessa stood up, her posture confident and unyielding. "You've made a mistake, and you'll regret it." She dialed her assistant once more. "Prepare the termination orders. Start with Lisa and Edward." Within minutes, security was on its way, and the staff members who had just attempted to humiliate her were about to face the consequences of their actions. The air in the lounge seemed to shift as Vanessa's words settled in. Patrons began murmuring, their disbelief slowly turning into support. The power dynamic had shifted, and it was clear that Vanessa wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for every person who had ever been dismissed or mistreated because of their appearance. As the security arrived, Vanessa's voice rang clear. "No one should ever be treated like I just was. Not here. Not anywhere." The staff, now realizing their mistake, looked on in shock as Vanessa made her final statement. "You can either respect the people who walk through these doors, or you can leave. Today, you leave." The door to the lounge opened, and as the employees were escorted out, the patrons erupted into applause. Vanessa stood tall, her presence filling the space. Her calm, unshakable demeanor had turned an ordinary moment into a powerful declaration of justice. As she left the lounge, her phone buzzed with a notification from her assistant. The corporate board has approved the audit. The changes will begin immediately. For Vanessa, this wasn't just about one small victory. It was about rewriting the rules for everyone who had ever been marginalized. The fight for fairness had just begun, and it would start with her. And with that, the world would see that real power didn't need to shout to be heard. It only needed to act. Just 9 minutes was all it took to change everything. As the last of the security team filed into the lounge, Vanessa remained standing in the center of the room, a calm presence amidst the chaos. The once tranquil environment now buzzed with tension. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixated on her, yet no one dared to speak. She could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment in their glances, but she stood unshaken, the full force of her resolve rooted deep inside. In the back corner of the lounge, a group of high-profile guests whispered to each other, still unsure of what was unfolding, their curiosity growing with each passing second. Lisa, the lounge manager, continued to glance nervously at her phone, her fingers fumbling as she tapped at the screen, her once cocky demeanor now faltering under the pressure. Edward, the brash investment banker, had crossed his arms in front of him, his gaze shifting uncomfortably from Vanessa to the rest of the room. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, but Vanessa remained still, her presence demanding attention. Slowly, she pulled out her phone once more and dialed her assistant, Carla, who answered immediately, her voice steady and calm. "Carla, I need you to initiate phase 2 of the protocol," Vanessa instructed, her words precise, carrying the weight of authority. Within moments, Carla confirmed, "Protocol activated. Ma'am, we're on track." The room grew colder, the tension sharper as Vanessa's calm voice cut through the confusion like a knife. "Everyone here is about to see what happens when you mistake silence for submission," she said softly, but with an edge that made her words feel like a promise. Lisa, Edward, and the rest of the staff were oblivious to what was coming next. They had thought that their status and their power could shield them, but they were wrong. Vanessa wasn't just a guest in their space, she was the one who owned it. As the minutes ticked by, Vanessa's words seemed to hang in the air, the weight of them building up like a storm ready to break. "I am not leaving," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "You may have thought I didn't belong, but you will see that I belong here more than any of you ever will." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some of the guests who had been silently watching now whispered among themselves, unsure of what to make of Vanessa's words. But she didn't care about their confusion. She was focused, her eyes locked on the employees who had tried to humiliate her, to erase her from this space. Lisa hesitated, looking at her phone as if she could somehow find a solution in its screen, but it was too late. The mistake had been made, and now there was no turning back. Vanessa calmly rose from her seat, her posture radiating authority. She stepped forward, her steps deliberate, her presence filling the room. "It's time for you to understand what true power looks like," she continued, addressing everyone present. "I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight for my place here. I simply needed to be who I am." The room fell silent, the tension now palpable. With one last glance at the staff, Vanessa's voice rang out, louder this time. "Lisa, Edward, you are both terminated. Effective immediately." The shock was immediate. Lisa's face drained of color, her hands shaking as she tried to process what Vanessa had just said. Edward stepped back, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to find the words, but none came. Carla's voice crackled through the phone. "The board has received the report, Vanessa. Everything is in motion. You have full support." Vanessa nodded, satisfied, but she wasn't finished yet. She turned to the remaining employees in the room. "You're all on notice," she said. "This institution will no longer tolerate this kind of behavior. From now on, respect is mandatory, and fairness will be upheld." The room was still for a moment before a quiet applause began to ripple through the guests. It started softly, but grew louder as more people stood, their support for Vanessa clear. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had been made to feel small, unworthy, and invisible because of the color of their skin or the way they dressed. As the last of the applause faded, Vanessa turned and walked toward the exit, her head held high. But before she stepped out of the lounge, she paused, her eyes sweeping the room one last time. "This is just the beginning," she said. And if you want to be a part of the future, you will have to earn your place. It's no longer about status, power, or position. It's about integrity, and that's something I won't tolerate being ignored anymore." With that, she left the lounge, her steps echoing in the silence behind her, as the world she had once been part of began to crumble and rebuild in her image. As the last of the security team filed into the lounge, Vanessa remained standing in the center of the room, a calm presence amidst the chaos. The once tranquil environment now buzzed with tension. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixated on her, yet no one dared to speak. She could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment in their glances, but she stood unshaken, the full force of her resolve rooted deep inside. In the back corner of the lounge, a group of high-profile guests whispered to each other, still unsure of what was unfolding, their curiosity growing with each passing second. Lisa, the lounge manager, continued to glance nervously at her phone, her fingers fumbling as she tapped at the screen, her once cocky demeanor now faltering under the pressure. Edward, the brash investment banker, had crossed his arms in front of him, his gaze shifting uncomfortably from Vanessa to the rest of the room. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, but Vanessa remained still, her presence demanding attention. Slowly, she pulled out her phone once more and dialed her assistant, Carla, who answered immediately, her voice steady and calm. "Carla, I need you to initiate phase 2 of the protocol," Vanessa instructed, her words precise, carrying the weight of authority. Within moments, Carla confirmed, "Protocol activated, ma'am. We're on track." The room grew colder, the tension sharper as Vanessa's calm voice cut through the confusion like a knife. "Everyone here is about to see what happens when you mistake silence for submission," she said softly, but with an edge that made her words feel like a promise. Lisa, Edward, and the rest of the staff were oblivious to what was coming next. They had thought that their status and their power could shield them, but they were wrong. Vanessa wasn't just a guest in their space, she was the one who owned it. As the minutes ticked by, Vanessa's words seemed to hang in the air, the weight of them building up like a storm ready to break. "I am not leaving," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "You may have thought I didn't belong, but you will see that I belong here more than any of you ever will." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some of the guests who had been silently watching now whispered among themselves, unsure of what to make of Vanessa's words. But she didn't care about their confusion. She was focused, her eyes locked on the employees who had tried to humiliate her, to erase her from this space. Lisa hesitated, looking at her phone as if she could somehow find a solution in its screen. But it was too late. The mistake had been made, and now there was no turning back. Vanessa calmly rose from her seat, her posture radiating authority. She stepped forward, her steps deliberate, her presence filling the room. "It's time for you to understand what true power looks like," she continued, addressing everyone present. "I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight for my place here. I simply needed to be who I am." The room fell silent, the tension now palpable. With one last glance at the staff, Vanessa's voice rang out, louder this time. "Lisa, Edward, you are both terminated. Effective immediately." The shock was immediate. Lisa's face drained of color, her hands shaking as she tried to process what Vanessa had just said. Edward stepped back, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to find the words, but none came. Carla's voice crackled through the phone. "The board has received the report, Vanessa. Everything is in motion. You have full support." Vanessa nodded, satisfied, but she wasn't finished yet. She turned to the remaining employees in the room. "You're all on notice," she said. "This institution will no longer tolerate this kind of behavior. From now on, respect is mandatory, and fairness will be upheld." The room was still for a moment before a quiet applause began to ripple through the guests. It started softly, but grew louder as more people stood, their support for Vanessa clear. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who had been made to feel small, unworthy, and invisible because of the color of their skin or the way they dressed. As the last of the applause faded, Vanessa turned and walked toward the exit, her head held high. But before she stepped out of the lounge, she paused, her eyes sweeping the room one last time. "This is just the beginning," she said, "and if you want to be a part of the future, you will have to earn your place. It's no longer about status, power, or position. It's about integrity, and that's something I won't tolerate being ignored anymore. With that, she left the lounge, her steps echoing in the silence behind her, as the world she had once been part of began to crumble and rebuild in her image. As Vanessa stepped out of the airport terminal, her mind was racing. She had made her point, but there was still so much to do. Her phone buzzed again, and she quickly answered, recognizing Carla's name on the screen. "The audit is underway," Carla said, her voice calm and professional. "We've flagged every instance of racial profiling in the lounge today, and the report is being sent to HR as we speak. We'll have full access to their records and the log of every guest who was treated unfairly." Vanessa nodded, her grip tightening on her phone. "Good. I want everyone involved in this incident to know that this is just the beginning. Make sure the board knows that I'm not letting this go." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And get a full review of that lounge's staff. I need to know everything about their performance over the past year." Carla's voice softened. "You've got it. We're on it." Vanessa hung up, her thoughts still swirling. This wasn't just about one bad interaction. It was about a culture of discrimination that had gone unchecked for far too long. She knew this was bigger than the airport lounge, bigger than the individual employees. It was a system that needed to be torn down and rebuilt, but that would take time. Time, which Vanessa had plenty of. She was in no rush to see this through, because she was just getting started. As she climbed into her car, the weight of her decision to stand up to the system began to sink in. She had always known that success came with its challenges, especially as a black woman at the top of a billion-dollar corporation. But today, she had taken a stand, and it felt different. It felt like the first step toward real change. With every mile that passed, Vanessa's resolve grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for her own seat at the table. She was fighting for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, for everyone who had been held back because of who they were or where they came from. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her legal team. "We've confirmed the internal report from the lounge. The employee behavior was flagrant, and we've got enough evidence to pursue legal action if needed." Vanessa stared at the screen for a moment, the reality of what she was about to do sinking in. She wasn't just going to change the policies at Summit Enterprises. She was going to change the very culture that allowed people to believe that others didn't belong. And she was going to do it on her own terms, with her own brand of quiet power. As she drove through the city, Vanessa thought about how many people had come before her, people who had fought the same battle, people who had been silenced, dismissed, and ignored. This was their fight too, and she wasn't going to let it be in vain. She was going to finish what they started, and she would do it with the quiet strength she had always carried inside her. When she arrived at the office, she was ready to face whatever came next. The building, tall and imposing, stood before her as a symbol of everything she had worked for, and now it would stand as a beacon for the changes she was about to make. Vanessa was ready, and as she stepped out of the car, she felt something shift within her. This was just the beginning of something much bigger, and nothing was going to stop her from seeing it through. Vanessa sat at her desk in her office, the weight of the day still pressing down on her, but she was focused. The emails, the phone calls, the meetings, she had been through it all before, but today felt different. Today, everything was aligned, and she had a purpose. She pulled up the internal report from the lounge incident and studied it closely. The names of the employees involved were highlighted, their actions clear and undeniable. The report wasn't just about one moment of discrimination. It painted a bigger picture, a culture of bias that had been ingrained in the institution. Vanessa's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and with a single click, she initiated a series of steps that would change everything. She sent a message to her legal team, requesting immediate action to address the systemic issues highlighted in the report. She needed the board to understand that this wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a pattern that had been allowed to thrive under the radar. As she read through the next set of reports from her HR team, she felt a sharp sense of urgency. This needed to be fixed now, not in weeks or months. The power dynamics in her company had to shift, and it had to happen under her watch. She called a meeting with her top executives, determined to lay out her plan. Within an hour, they were all in the conference room, waiting for her. Vanessa stood at the front, her presence commanding attention without saying a word. The executives, many of whom were seasoned leaders in their own right, exchanged wary glances. They knew Vanessa didn't take matters like this lightly, and when she spoke, it was clear that the moment had arrived. "We've just seen the consequences of complacency," Vanessa began, her voice steady but firm. "And it stops now." The room fell silent as she continued, outlining the changes she was about to implement. "We are going to hold every department accountable, from top to bottom. No more tolerance for bias, no more tolerance for discrimination. We are starting with mandatory bias training for every single employee, from our front desk staff to our top executives." Her eyes moved across the room, making sure every person understood the gravity of her words. "And if anyone fails to meet the new standards, they will be removed." She paused, letting the weight of her statement sink in. "This is a company-wide overhaul. I'm not asking for your agreement. I'm telling you that this is happening, and we will all be held to the same standards. From now on, this company will stand for fairness, inclusivity, and respect." Vanessa's words hung in the air, a promise to everyone in the room and beyond. She knew this was going to be an uphill battle, but she had already won the most important fight. She had control. And she was going to use that control to dismantle the system that had allowed discrimination to flourish. "We've come a long way," she continued, her voice rising with conviction. "But we have a lot more work to do. This is not just about making policies. It's about changing hearts and minds. It's about building a company culture where every employee feels valued, regardless of who they are or where they come from." As the meeting went on, Vanessa's leadership became clear. The executives were on board, and the message had been received loud and clear. She wasn't just the CEO, she was the one setting the tone for the future of the company. The rest of the meeting was filled with plans for the rollout of new programs, new policies, and new procedures that would ensure equality for all employees. When the meeting ended, Vanessa walked back to her office, her mind still racing, but now with a sense of determination she had never felt before. She wasn't just changing the policies of one company. She was paving the way for a future where everyone had an equal chance to succeed. The first steps had been taken, and there was no turning back. The next few days were a whirlwind for Vanessa. She had quickly moved from one challenge to the next, making decisions that would reshape the company for years to come. As the hours passed, she remained focused, determined, and unwavering in her commitment to ensure that the culture of Summit Enterprises was no longer one that allowed discrimination to fester. The first of many training sessions began, and it was clear that the room was divided. Some employees looked uncomfortable, while others were eager to participate, understanding the importance of the changes that were being implemented. Vanessa was present at every session, her presence a reminder of the weight behind the initiative. She had taken the time to address her employees personally, outlining the goals for the future, and reminding them that this was a process of growth, not just a punishment for past mistakes. She wanted them to understand that this wasn't about pointing fingers. It was about building a more inclusive environment for everyone. Her team responded with varying degrees of engagement, but Vanessa was undeterred. She knew the resistance would come, but she also knew that the transformation would be worth it. The hardest part was yet to come, the deep, systemic changes that would require more than just training. The real work would happen behind closed doors, in the meetings with board members, investors, and executives who had, for years, turned a blind eye to the inequality within the company. As she prepared for another high-stakes meeting with the board, Vanessa couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. It wasn't just the success of her company that mattered now. It was the responsibility she had taken on to make sure that success was accessible to everyone. The boardroom was filled with familiar faces as Vanessa walked in, but today, the atmosphere was different. There was a new air of respect in the room, and she could feel the subtle shift in power. As the meeting began, she addressed the board with the same clarity and conviction that had served her so well during the training sessions. "We are moving forward with the changes we've discussed," Vanessa stated firmly, her gaze sweeping across the room. "These policies are not just guidelines. They are the foundation of the future of this company." The board members exchanged wary glances, some more resistant than others. One of the senior executives, a longtime member of the board, leaned forward and spoke up. "Vanessa, we understand the direction you're taking, but these changes will take time. The process won't be easy, and we need to consider the financial impact." Vanessa's expression didn't change. "The financial impact of doing nothing will be far greater than any changes we make now," she replied calmly, her voice cutting through the room with authority. "We've already seen the consequences of inaction. This is not just about doing the right thing. It's about ensuring that Summit Enterprises continues to thrive in a changing world." The room fell silent for a moment as the board members processed her words. One by one, they began to nod in agreement, their resistance slowly melting away. Vanessa's words were not just persuasive, they were undeniable. She had proven that the company's values could no longer be aligned with outdated practices. With the board now on board, Vanessa set her sights on the next phase of her plan. The internal audits were already underway, and soon, the entire structure of Summit Enterprises would begin to shift, from the top down. No stone would be left unturned, no system left unchecked. Vanessa knew this journey was just beginning, but the path ahead was clearer than ever. She was ready to take on whatever came next. As the days passed, Vanessa's vision for Summit Enterprises began to take shape. The board had been on board, the audits were being conducted, and the first stages of change were in motion. But Vanessa knew that true transformation would require more than just policies and audits. It would take a shift in mindset, from the most senior executives down to the frontline employees. She wasn't just aiming to improve the company's structure. She was determined to change its culture, making inclusivity, respect, and fairness the very core of its identity. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. There would be resistance, moments of doubt, and plenty of setbacks along the way. But Vanessa had never shied away from a challenge. If anything, the more difficult the fight, the more resolved she became. In the meantime, her leadership was already making waves in the industry. News of the changes at Summit Enterprises spread quickly, and Vanessa found herself fielding calls from other CEOs, some eager to learn from her success, while others seemed skeptical. Some questioned whether the changes were truly necessary. But Vanessa had long since stopped worrying about what others thought. She was focused on one thing: building a company that stood for something bigger than profits. A company that could lead by example, not just in business, but in integrity. One afternoon, Vanessa sat down with Carla, her executive assistant, to review the latest round of audit findings. The reports were troubling. There were still areas of the company where biases had gone unchecked, where employees had been subjected to discriminatory practices, even in the new training sessions. "It's going to take time," Carla said softly, clearly concerned. "Some people are resisting the changes more than we thought." Vanessa sighed, but her resolve remained unshaken. "I know," she said, tapping her fingers on the desk. "But this is where we dig in. We're not here to make a few cosmetic changes. We're here to dismantle a system that has been broken for far too long." Carla nodded, understanding the weight of Vanessa's words. They both knew the path ahead would be difficult, but Vanessa was determined to keep pushing forward. She wasn't just fighting for equality in her company. She was fighting for the future of corporate America, where people of all backgrounds could thrive without fear of discrimination. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa took a more hands-on approach. She attended more of the training sessions herself, speaking directly to employees, reassuring them that the changes weren't just for show, they were for everyone, for every employee, from the entry-level workers to the executives. She shared stories of her own experiences with discrimination, the times when she had been told she wasn't qualified or capable, just because of the color of her skin. "It's time we all face the reality of where we've been and where we need to go," she told them, her voice unwavering. "We're all in this together, and the change begins with each of us, right here, right now." Slowly but surely, Vanessa began to see the shift she had been working toward. Employees started to speak up in meetings, sharing their own experiences and ideas for change. More and more, people were embracing the new culture of transparency, accountability, and respect. But as the company moved forward, Vanessa knew the real test was still to come. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were many battles left to fight. But she was ready. She had already taken the first step toward creating the future she envisioned, and nothing was going to stop her now. The weeks that followed were a test of patience and perseverance for Vanessa. As the training sessions continued and the audits were wrapped up, the resistance she had anticipated became more pronounced. Some employees began to push back against the changes, voicing their discomfort with the new policies. Others, more quietly, resisted by simply going through the motions, not fully embracing the cultural shift she had fought so hard to implement. Yet, Vanessa remained undeterred. She knew that true change was never easy, and that there would always be those who clung to old ways. What mattered was the momentum, the shift in mindset that had already begun. The conversations that had once been whispered behind closed doors were now being held out in the open. Employees were talking about bias, about fairness, about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. There were still setbacks, of course. A few high-ranking executives remained aloof, unwilling to fully commit to the changes. They questioned the long-term financial impact, the costs of implementing new programs, and whether these initiatives would truly make a difference. But Vanessa refused to back down. She had made a commitment, not only to her company, but to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. She knew that building a more inclusive and fair workplace would take time, but it was a fight worth having. One afternoon, as she was going through a stack of reports in her office, her phone buzzed with a call from Carla. "We've got some good news," Carla said, her voice laced with excitement. "The internal feedback from the first round of training is overwhelmingly positive. Employees are starting to embrace the changes, and many of them are sharing their own experiences about how they've felt marginalized in the past." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, a sense of relief washing over her. It was a small victory, but it was a sign that the efforts were starting to pay off. "That's great," she said, her tone warm. "But we still have a long way to go." She paused, looking out the window at the city below. "We need to make sure that every department, every team, is fully on board. No exceptions." Carla agreed, and they spent the next hour going over the next steps. Vanessa was determined to see this through, to make Summit Enterprises a company where diversity was not just a buzzword, but a reality. It was not enough to simply implement policies. She needed to ensure that those policies were ingrained in the culture, that they became a natural part of the company's DNA. That meant continuing to lead by example, holding her executives accountable, and creating a space where all employees, regardless of background, felt empowered to speak up and contribute. As the days went by, Vanessa's resolve only grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for equality in her company. She was fighting for a new way of thinking, a new way of doing business. It wasn't just about policy changes, it was about creating a culture of respect, fairness, and opportunity for everyone. And she knew, with each step, she was getting closer to achieving that vision. But there were still challenges ahead. There would be more resistance, more doubts, and more difficult decisions to make. But Vanessa was ready. She had started something that couldn't be undone, and no matter how long it took, she was going to see it through. The transformation at Summit Enterprises was starting to take shape, but it was clear to Vanessa that the real work was far from over. With every new policy implemented, with every training session held, a subtle shift was happening within the company. Yet, the resistance was still there, quiet, persistent, and often masked by well-meaning words that lacked true commitment. Vanessa knew the path ahead would not be a smooth one, but she had made her decision. She wasn't turning back. One of the most significant hurdles now was facing the internal backlash from a few of the company's top executives, who had begun to question the direction of the company under her leadership. At a board meeting, one of the senior executives, Mark, a man who had been with the company for over 20 years, spoke up. "Vanessa, I understand what you're trying to do, but these changes are going to have a massive financial impact," Mark said, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. "Our profit margins are already tight, and these policies, these training sessions, they're costing us. We need to consider the long-term ramifications." Vanessa could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken support for Mark's words. The air felt heavy with doubt, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. "The long-term ramifications," Vanessa responded coolly, "are that we risk losing not only employees but also potential clients and investors if we continue to operate the way we have. Discrimination, whether conscious or unconscious, will eventually cost us more than any training program ever could." The room fell silent. Mark's face reddened slightly, but he didn't argue. Vanessa continued, her tone firm but measured. We're not just shifting policies. We are building a culture that is inclusive and respectful. This isn't a matter of charity. It's a matter of doing what's right and doing what's necessary for the future of this company. As she finished speaking, she could see some of the board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, but others were beginning to nod, a quiet recognition that Vanessa was right. The world was changing, and Summit Enterprises needed to change with it. After the meeting, Carla sent a follow-up email to the board, reminding them of the progress they had already made. The positive feedback from employees, the rising morale, and the improvements in recruitment. The financials, though tight, were still strong. Change would be challenging, but it was necessary, and Vanessa had no intention of backing down. Over the following weeks, Vanessa continued to push forward with her plan. She implemented more transparent reporting systems for complaints, set up direct channels for employees to share concerns anonymously, and even created an advisory board made up of employees from all levels of the company to ensure that everyone's voice was heard. Slowly but surely, her efforts began to bear fruit. There was still some resistance, but it was less vocal now, less aggressive. Employees were beginning to see the changes, and those who had once been skeptical were starting to buy in. Summit Enterprises was becoming a company that not only talked about diversity, but actively worked to build it. Vanessa's determination was paying off, and with every challenge she faced, she grew more confident in her vision. But she knew the work was never truly done. As long as there were systems in place that made it harder for people to succeed based on their race, gender, or background, the work would continue. Vanessa had committed to making sure that Summit Enterprises would be a company where everyone had an equal opportunity to thrive, no matter their circumstances. It wasn't just about changing the company. It was about changing the world, one step at a time. Months passed, and the changes at Summit Enterprises began to take root. What once seemed like an insurmountable challenge was slowly becoming the new reality. Vanessa had remained vigilant in her pursuit of a truly inclusive and respectful workplace, and the evidence of her efforts was undeniable. Employee satisfaction was up, complaints were down, and the atmosphere in the offices was noticeably different. Still, Vanessa knew that achieving sustainable change would require more than just internal adjustments. It required the broader community to take notice of what was happening at Summit Enterprises. One afternoon, as she walked through the lobby of the company headquarters, she noticed a few employees from different departments engaged in animated conversation. They were discussing the new initiatives and, surprisingly, the improvements they had seen in their work culture. Vanessa overheard snippets of their conversation. People were feeling empowered, seen, and valued in ways they hadn't before. It was the kind of feedback she had hoped for when she began this journey, and it made the hard work worth it. The shift wasn't just visible in the attitudes of her employees. It was also showing in the company's brand reputation. Summit Enterprises was now being recognized for its commitment to diversity and inclusion, not just in the workplace, but in the community as well. Media outlets began reaching out, asking for interviews, and competitors were quietly observing, perhaps wondering how they could replicate Vanessa's success. Despite the positive changes, there was still work to be done. The path Vanessa had chosen wasn't one of instant gratification. It was a marathon, not a sprint. She continued to meet with her executive team, ensuring that every department was holding up its end of the bargain. But what she realized more than ever was that the heart of this transformation lay not in policies or training, but in the everyday actions of her people. The way they interacted with each other, the way they listened, the way they treated their colleagues. It was in the moments when no one was watching that the real culture was being built. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Vanessa found herself reflecting on how far they had come. She sat in her office, looking out the window at the city lights, taking a deep breath. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been without resistance, but she had stayed true to her vision. Vanessa knew that there would always be more work to do, more barriers to break, more systems to dismantle. But she was ready. Summit Enterprises was no longer just a company. It had become a symbol of what was possible when you challenged the status quo, when you stood up against the systems that perpetuated inequality. And it was just the beginning. The future was unfolding right before her, and Vanessa was determined to lead it with courage, conviction, and the unwavering belief that change was not only possible but necessary. As the months rolled on, the impact of Vanessa's leadership became undeniable. Summit Enterprises was now a company known not just for its financial success, but for its commitment to creating a fair and inclusive environment. The changes were no longer just talked about in boardrooms or company emails, they were visible in every department, in every interaction. Employees were showing up to work with a renewed sense of purpose, their voices heard, their contributions valued. But while things were better than they had been, Vanessa knew there was still much to be done. The true test of any transformation was whether the change was sustainable. Vanessa's biggest concern was always the same: how to maintain momentum in the face of complacency. It would have been easy to sit back and enjoy the victories, but she knew better. Change, especially the kind of change she was leading, required constant vigilance. One day, as she sat in her office, reviewing a report on the latest employee engagement survey, Vanessa received a call that would challenge everything she had worked so hard to build. The call came from Carla, who was calm but clearly concerned. "Vanessa, we have a problem," Carla said. "A high-profile client just pulled their account, citing our new policies as the reason." Vanessa's heart sank. She had known that not everyone would agree with the changes, but she hadn't anticipated this kind of setback. "What exactly did they say?" Vanessa asked, trying to steady herself. "They're concerned about the direction we're taking, and they feel that our focus on diversity and inclusion is taking priority over financial performance. They're worried it's going to hurt the bottom line," Carla explained. Vanessa paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had been bracing for. It wasn't just about changing the company, it was about standing firm when that change faced pushback from the people who were used to the old ways of doing things. "I want you to schedule a meeting with them," Vanessa said finally, her voice steady, "and make it clear that our values are non-negotiable. If they can't get behind what we're doing, then they're not the right fit for us." Carla didn't hesitate. "Understood? I'll set it up right away." After hanging up, Vanessa sat back in her chair, her mind racing. The decision to confront this client wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She had made a commitment to lead Summit Enterprises with integrity, and she wasn't going to let anything, especially a single client, derail the progress they had made. The following days were filled with preparation. Vanessa reviewed the client's history with the company, read over the financial reports, and worked with her team to ensure that they had the data to back up their decision. When the meeting finally took place, Vanessa walked into the room with confidence, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. The client representative, a seasoned executive with years of industry experience, was seated across from her, arms crossed, his expression skeptical. "Vanessa, I understand your position," he began, his tone diplomatic but firm. "But we need to be clear here. We're a business, and our priority is profit. Diversity initiatives are important, but they can't come at the expense of our financial goals." Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but resolute. "I understand your concern, but let me be clear. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are not just policies here. They are the foundation of who we are and the future we're building. Our financial success is built on that foundation. Without it, we are nothing." The client's eyes narrowed, clearly taken aback by her firmness. "So you're saying your values come before the bottom line?" he asked. Vanessa nodded. "Exactly. The bottom line will follow when you do the right thing. We have built a stronger, more resilient company because we prioritize people, our employees, our clients, and our communities." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of Vanessa's words sank in. Finally, the client sighed, clearly weighing his options. "I'll need to take this back to my team and discuss it," he said, standing up. "But I appreciate the clarity." As the meeting ended, Vanessa remained composed, but inside, she knew this was a turning point. She wasn't just protecting Summit Enterprises, she was protecting the values that had driven its success. And if that meant losing a client, so be it. Vanessa knew that the road ahead would continue to be difficult, but she was no longer afraid. She was prepared to fight for what she believed in, no matter the cost. Days passed after the meeting, and Vanessa's resolve was only strengthened. Summit Enterprises had made it clear the company would never compromise its values for the sake of short-term profit. The client who had raised concerns about the company's focus on diversity and inclusion had yet to respond, but Vanessa didn't waste any time worrying. She knew this was a test, one that she had to pass not just for herself, but for everyone who had placed their trust in her leadership. As she sat at her desk one morning, going through the latest reports and financial data, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Carla, and her voice was lighter than usual, tinged with excitement. "Vanessa, the client has come back with an answer," Carla said. "They want to continue working with us." Vanessa felt a brief surge of relief, but she didn't let herself become complacent. She knew the battle wasn't over yet. "What was their reasoning?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying none of her anticipation. "They admitted that their initial concerns were based on misunderstanding the long-term vision you have," Carla replied. "They said they didn't fully grasp how inclusion and diversity drive better results in the long run. They want to remain partners, and they're ready to align with our goals." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, taking in the news. This was a significant win, but she also knew it meant even more work ahead. If she was going to keep pushing Summit Enterprises to higher levels of inclusivity and excellence, she had to ensure that every single client and partner fully understood what they were signing up for. "Set up a follow-up meeting with them," Vanessa instructed. "We need to reaffirm that our commitment to inclusivity is non-negotiable. It's not just part of our culture, it's the foundation of our success." Later that week, Vanessa sat across from the client's executive team once again, but this time, the conversation was different. The tension from the previous meeting had dissipated. The client executives, who had initially questioned Vanessa's approach, were now listening closely, engaging openly, and expressing their willingness to be part of the positive change Vanessa had been advocating for. "I'm glad to hear that you're on board," Vanessa said, her voice calm and confident, yet firm. "But I want to make one thing clear. Summit Enterprises will never compromise its values. If you want to continue this partnership, you need to understand that inclusivity is at the heart of everything we do. We don't just talk about it, we live it every day." The client representatives nodded, acknowledging the sincerity in her words. They had learned from their earlier resistance, and now they were ready to support Vanessa's vision. "We understand," one of them said, a genuine tone in their voice. "We're in this for the long haul." Vanessa smiled slightly, relieved but resolute. She had faced a moment of doubt, but now it was clear. She had not only secured Summit Enterprises' future, but she had also solidified her role as a leader who would not compromise on what was right. As the meeting concluded, Vanessa's mind began to turn to the next phase of her plan. There was still more to be done, more partnerships to form, more policies to implement, and more minds to change. The fight for fairness, for equality, was ongoing, but she was ready. Summit Enterprises had just entered a new era, one that would redefine success not just in profits, but in the way it treated every individual who came through its doors. And Vanessa knew she would be at the helm, guiding them toward a future where everyone, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to thrive.